here's our Act 2 Romeo and Juliet discussion.
Okay, so let's just go ahead and discuss some of the things that are important to learn from this act of Romeo and Juliet.
So looking at number 1, the first thing that we need to recognize is soliloquy. Soliloquy is when somebody goes off essentially in just like this monologue, right? Like they're just talking consistently, going on and on about something. Is there more to add to that?
Well, I think really it's the purpose is to let us know the character's thoughts, because we can't see, we can't really understand what's going on in their head. It's not like a book where it can express their thoughts and what they're thinking, and so the soliloquy is the way they can express those deep feelings even without anybody else on the stage.
I always think of soliloquy, the first part of that, like soliloquy, solo. It's their own individual thoughts and feelings.
Juliet definitely does that in Act 2. She kind of goes off, and I think the one that we always remember is "Wherefore Romeo," which is what she was saying. So, like, what is she going on about, and like, why is it important to know that what she's saying there? So she kind of says, should I read it?
Sure.
Says, "'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, thou not a Montague. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, of be some other name belonging to a man." So essentially, she's saying that she hates not Romeo himself, but she hates his name, right?
Because the name is what's standing in the way of them being together, right? Because they're both two eligible young people that could date if it weren't for the fact that their families are enemies.
Only he was a Capulet.
Yeah. Right. Or just anything that wasn't a Montague.
Yeah, it's true.
One of the things I've always thought interesting about this is the conclusion that she comes to about, what does a name really matter? So that's what she hates at first because it keeps them apart. But then, what does it really matter? A rose by any other name is still a rose.
So she's giving herself permission to love him even though he is an enemy. Mm-hmm. Cool.
I like it.
Okay.
So then in Act 2, Scene 2, Romeo and Juliet, as we saw, profess their love for one another. And Juliet is supposed to contact Romeo through a servant the next day. And so it's important to note that why is she contacting him? Like, what is the purpose of her sending a servant to go find him? And right here in Act 2, it says, Juliet says, "Thy purpose, marriage, send me word tomorrow, by one that I'll procure to come to thee, where and what time thou wilt perform the rite, and all my fortunes at thy foot I'll lay, and follow thee, my lord, throughout the world." So what do you guys think she's really saying there?
Well, it's really funny because before that, not very long before that, she's saying, I don't really feel good about this. I feel like we're moving too fast. And then suddenly she's saying, but if you really love me, let's get married tomorrow. So it's kind of a quick change.
And we only kissed earlier, so why not get married?
Right. And I'll follow you throughout the world.
So really she's just saying that she's going to send a servant to get the information of when and where they're going to get married.
Right. Okay, number 3. Oh, I have that one. Okay, why does Friar Laurence agree to marry Romeo and Juliet? So he understands, he as a citizen of Verona, and understands the feud that's going on between the families. And I think he understands that there could be some big problems if these two kids, if their parents find out. But he ends up saying, this is around line 90, he said, in one respect I'll thy assistant be, for this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love. So the only reason he agrees to do it is because he thinks that it might have a chance to end the feud.
He is a neutral character, so he's not for or against either family, so it's important to know that, yeah.
And they both go to him for
advice.
Religious advice, yeah.
I always thought it was kind of interesting that he feels like Romeo is kind of iffy when it comes to Romeo and women, but he's still willing to do this thing sort of for the greater good.
Right. Well, and I loved how he was kind of chiding Romeo for being so quick to change. And he says, look, there's a tear on your cheek that hasn't washed off from Rosaline. And then I thought, just yesterday he was over whining to Friar Laurence about how he was in love with this girl that didn't love him back, and now he wants to marry somebody else, but he agrees to do it anyway. So, and an interesting thing is divorce was not a thing then in the Catholic Church. That just couldn't happen, and so it's really a big step to take that, knowing that you can't just say, never mind. So, okay. Question 4, what message does the nurse take to Juliet? So they had sent the nurse to be the messenger that would bring back the word of the wedding. And so she went out and got harassed and everything by Romeo's friends that were all joking around, and finally got the word of when the wedding was supposed to be, and came back and took forever to tell Juliet. So Juliet is waiting around and just going crazy wanting the news of what happened. And she said, the clock struck 9 when I did send the nurse, and now it's past noon and she's not back yet. So she finally comes back, and Juliet's saying, oh, what's the news? What's happened? And the nurse just delays and delays, and she says, oh, my back hurts. I'm out of breath. And
I think the nurse is so funny. And she just is teasing Juliet.
Really, and just stringing her along as long as she can.
So funny.
And Juliet says, how do you have the breath to tell me you're out of breath? Just tell me the news. So, yeah, it's funny. So, she finally comes around and says, do you have permission to go to confession today? Have you got leave to go to shrift today? And Juliet says, yes, I have. Then you go to Friar Laurence's cell, and there stays a husband to make you a wife. So just that afternoon, she's supposed to go to Friar Laurence's cell and meet Romeo there where they can be married.
All right. So the friar, as he's discussing things with Romeo, he does have a warning for sort of extreme living. He says, so this is Act 2, Scene 6, these violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die, like fire and powder, which, as they kiss, consume. Now, if you're not sure what he's talking about here, which I know you guys are, but for those of you at home,
hey, I might not be.
He's talking about gunpowder. So he's talking about how when you live in such an extreme way, it's like mixing fire and gunpowder that as they come together causes this explosion.
And just like immediate, you put a match anywhere near gunpowder and it just suddenly is gone. It's not a slow burn.
Right. And, I mean, I'm sure we've all talked about this with our classes before the closure, but this is a tragedy. So whenever you have a character that's basically saying, watch out, things are going to go badly, we should probably take it seriously.
Right.
A little foreshadowing, yeah. So now let's relate this to real life. So question 6 says, before Romeo meets up with Friar Laurence, the friar is discussing the many ways that plants can be used. According to him, every plant has both good and bad uses. His example is a flower that has a wonderful smell, but if it is eaten, it will cause death. Relate this to your own life and answer one of the following questions in a full paragraph. So that's for you guys.
Paragraph.
Full paragraph. That means 6 to 8 sentences. Topic sentence, supporting details.
And yes, we do read what you write.
Every word.
Does anyone have one that they want to share?
Well, the first paragraph, the first prompt is, has there ever been a time in your life when something bad happened that actually turned out to be a good thing? Or has there ever been a time in your life, the second one, when something good happened to you that actually turned out to be a bad thing?
I'll start. So when I was 25, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I felt like that was like crippling. I felt like that was the most awful thing that could have ever happened to me. And through the course of that year that I went through treatments and everything, I learned a lot of really cool life lessons. I met some really amazing people when I was down at the Huntsman and was able to help them and then get to know them in ways that I wouldn't have. And I got a really cool relationship with a lot of my doctors. But looking back on it, it's been 7 years since that happened. And a lot of that, what I thought was really terrible at the time and like life-shattering, has turned out to be a really good thing. It's given me a better perspective on life. and just really cool life lessons that I wouldn't trade that. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I wouldn't want to trade that either.
I mean, for me, I even think of like a simple thing is like I failed a class before, and like I think that it wasn't until that moment that I really learned what I needed to until I failed it. So I failed a math class in college, and guess what? That really stunk, and I had to pay for it. But because I failed it, I was 10 times more motivated to pass it so that I could become a teacher. So.
Well, and I actually got my lowest grade in college was in a grammar class. And I hated that class. It was the first C I'd had since 8th grade. And it drove me nuts. I couldn't stand it. And I ended up retaking it just because I wanted to get the C off my transcript. And the second class I had was from a different teacher, different philosophy of grammar instruction. And it completely changed the way I understood the way words work together. And he used this different type of grammar, phrase transformational grammar, that all kind of opened up the doors to my understanding. So even though it was awful to have such a bad experience in that first class, having the second one that opened doors for me was amazing.
So I'm sure if I thought back, I would have tons and tons of these experiences. But the first one that comes to my mind, years ago when I was trying to get into my student teaching program, the school that I was supposed to be working with kept telling me, yeah, you're going to come work here, you're going to come work here, we're going to set it up. But they just kept pushing it off and weren't giving me any real details. And then just a couple days before I was supposed to start teaching at that school, they just say, oh, by the way, you're not working here. And transferred me to a different school. And so I was behind. I hadn't had time to meet with all of the people that I wound up being assigned with. So I was already weeks behind schedule, basically. But at that school, I met a lot of really great people, a lot of really great teachers, and it led to a job later. So in the end, it worked out. Cool.
Okay, I think that should wrap up our discussion for Act 2, and hopefully it's given our students what they need to be able to understand Romeo and Juliet at the level we need them to understand.
And do well on the quiz.
Yep. Okay,